My name is Daniel Mitchell, and until 6 months ago, I had what most would consider an enviable life. I'm the head architect at Horizon Designs, one of Portland's most prestigious firms. I specialize in sustainable commercial buildings, and my work has been featured in several industry magazines. But professional success is only part of what defined me. I was also half of what our friends called Portland's power couple. Eliza and I met in graduate school at MIT. She was studying business with a focus on luxury brand management while I was completing my master's in architecture. We were opposites in many ways. She was outgoing and ambitious, while I was more methodical and reserved, but we balanced each other perfectly. After graduation, we moved to Portland when I received an offer from Horizon. Eliza quickly established herself in the marketing department of Sinclair Luxury Properties, the city's premier high-end real estate firm that we bought a craftsman-style house in the Eastmoreland neighborhood, renovated it to perfection, and settled into our life together. We hosted dinner parties where Eliza would charm our guests while I prepared elaborate meals. We traveled to architectural landmarks around the world. We were saving to start a family, just waiting for the right time when our careers were stable enough. Everyone thought we had the perfect marriage. Even I believed it. Eliza was ambitious and driven, often working late as she climbed the corporate ladder at Sinclair. When she was promoted to marketing director 3 years ago, I couldn't have been prouder. Her client list included some of the wealthiest property developers in the Pacific Northwest, and she expertly navigated the social circles of Portland's elite. You should see how people respond to her. Her colleague Mia told me at the company Christmas party last year. She walks into a room, and everyone gravitates toward her. It's like watching a masterclass in networking. I smiled, watching Eliza across the room as she laughed with the CEO, her hand casually touching his arm to emphasize a point. That was my wife. Confident, charismatic, and completely in her element. "You're a lucky man," Mia added, following my gaze. "Don't I know it?" I replied that I had no idea how wrong I was. The first signs appeared so gradually that I dismissed them. Architects are trained to notice details, to see the small flaws that might indicate structural issues. But when it came to my own marriage, I was blind to the warning signs until they became too obvious to ignore. It started with the late nights. Eliza had always worked long hours, but there was a sudden increase about 8 months ago. She explained that Sinclair had landed an exclusive contract with Northwest Development Group, a company transforming an old industrial area into luxury condominiums. The account executive was Richard Blackwell, a developer with a reputation for both brilliance and ruthlessness in the industry. "He's demanding," Eliza told me one night as she packed her laptop at 9 p.m., preparing to head back to the office. But this account could mean everything for my career at Sinclair. I nodded, understanding the demands of professional success. "Just don't work too hard," I said, kissing her goodbye. "I miss seeing you." She smiled distantly. "It won't be forever, just until we get the campaign launched." But even after the campaign launched to great acclaim, the late nights continued. Then came the weekend meetings, the sudden business trips to Seattle, and the constant text messages that would make her smile at her phone in a way she rarely smiled at me anymore. Her habits changed in subtle ways too. She began wearing new perfume, spending more time at the gym, and buying lingerie that I never saw her wear. Once, I found a hotel receipt in her purse while looking for car keys, a downtown Portland luxury hotel on a Wednesday afternoon. When I asked about it, she explained it away as a venue she was considering for a client event. "You can't expect clients to commit to a space I haven't personally vetted," she said smoothly that I wanted to believe her. But the architect in me couldn't ignore the asymmetry developing in our relationship, the information being withheld, the explanations that didn't quite fit, the growing distance between us. One evening, I tried to bridge that distance. I made reservations at Eliza's favorite restaurant, bought flowers, and suggested we take the night off to reconnect. "I can't tonight," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "Richard needs the revised proposals by tomorrow morning." "Richard," I repeated. "You mention him a lot these days." She finally looked at me, her expression carefully neutral. "He's my biggest client, Daniel. Of course I mention him. Is that all he is? A client?" Her eyes flashed with something, anger? Guilt? Before she regained her composure. "What exactly are you implying?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But something feels different, Eliza. You're different." She sighed and set down her phone. I'm under a lot of pressure at work. This account is make or break for me. I'm sorry if I've been distant, but I need you to understand and support me right now, not add to my stress with accusations. I backed down, feeling guilty for questioning her. That night, she left for another emergency meeting, and I sat alone in our beautifully designed home, wondering when the blueprints of our marriage had changed without my knowledge. They say the husband is always the last to know. In my case, it wasn't a dramatic discovery, no lipstick on the collar or suspicious phone call. Instead, it was a series of small revelations that finally formed a complete picture I could no longer ignore. The definitive moment came on a rainy Tuesday in March. I had a meeting canceled unexpectedly, leaving my afternoon free. On impulse, I decided to surprise Eliza with lunch. She had mentioned having a strategy session with the Northwest development team at their downtown office. I picked up food from her favorite Thai restaurant and headed to the Northwest Development headquarters. At the reception desk, I asked for Eliza Mitchell. The receptionist looked confused. I'm sorry, there's no one by that name here today. She's not with the marketing team from Sinclair? They should be in a meeting with Richard Blackwell. The young woman checked her computer. Mr. Blackwell isn't in the office today. He's working from home, and there's no meeting with Sinclair Luxury Properties on the schedule. I thanked her and left, the bag of Thai food growing cold in my hands. I sat in my car, rain drumming on the roof, and called Eliza's office. Eliza Mitchell's office, her assistant answered. Hi Jen, it's Daniel. Is Eliza available? A pause. She's not in today. She's working from home with a migraine. I hung up, a cold certainty settling in my stomach. I opened my laptop and pulled up our shared cell phone account. In the recent calls, one number appeared repeatedly, sometimes, with conversations lasting hours, often late at night or early in the morning. Next, I checked our credit card statements. There were charges from hotels, restaurants I'd never been to, a jewelry store where I hadn't purchased anything. Finally, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I activated the Find My Phone feature on Eliza's account. The blue dot appeared. On the map at an address in the West Hills, Portland's most exclusive neighborhood. I drove there in a daze, rain still pounding on my windshield. The house was impressive, modern architecture with walls of glass overlooking the city. In the circular driveway sat Eliza's white Audi, parked next to a black Range Rover. I didn't approach the house. I didn't need to. I knew whose home it was, Richard Blackwell's. I'd seen it featured in a local architecture magazine just months earlier. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching the rain streak down my windows, obscuring the house where my wife was with another man. A married man. I had met his wife Caroline at a Sinclair event last year, a graceful, intelligent woman who ran a nonprofit for disadvantaged youth. Eventually, I drove home. I didn't confront Eliza that night when she returned, claiming to have been at the office all day. I said nothing about my discovery the next day or the day after that. Instead, I watched and I planned. Because in that moment of clarity, sitting in my car outside Richard Blackwell's house, I made a decision. This wouldn't end with a screaming match and hasty divorce. No, this betrayal deserved a more considered response. Eliza and Richard had constructed their affair carefully, maintaining their public images while secretly destroying two marriages. As an architect, I understood the importance of structure, of careful planning. So I would design something too, an intricate blueprint for consequences that would be executed with precision. The rain had stopped by the time I drove home, but the storm within me was just beginning. For 3 weeks, I lived a double life. To Eliza, I was the same supportive husband, perhaps a bit more distracted with work, but otherwise unchanged. Meanwhile, I was methodically gathering evidence and preparing for what would come next. First, I needed proof. I purchased a small, high-quality voice recorder and placed it in Eliza's car beneath the passenger seat. I installed tracking software on our home computer that logged all emails and messages. I engaged a private investigator, an expense I justified as an investment in my future. Within days, I had all the confirmation I needed. The recordings captured phone conversations between Eliza and Richard discussing their relationship, planning their meetings, even laughing about their spouse's ignorance. The emails contained intimate exchanges and plans for a weekend getaway to the Oregon coast, but evidence was just the beginning. I needed to understand the full scope of their deception before I could respond appropriately. I discovered their affair had been going on for nearly a year. I learned that Richard had helped Eliza secure her promotion by advocating for Sinclair to handle all marketing for Northwest Development's projects. I found out that they had discussed a future together after they had figured out how to leave their respective marriages with minimal financial damage. Caroline would take me to the cleaners if she found out, Richard said in one recorded conversation. We need to be smart about this. Daniel would never suspect anything, Eliza had replied. He's too trusting. We just need more time to get everything in place. Those words hardened my resolve. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated deception with me cast as the oblivious fool. Next, I secured my financial position. I spoke with an attorney, Margot Chun, a divorce specialist known for her strategic approach, without telling Eliza. On Margot's advice, I gathered all financial records, documented our assets, and quietly moved half of our savings into a separate account. I couldn't touch Eliza's individual accounts or the joint accounts without raising suspicion, but I could protect what was rightfully mine. Oregon is an equitable distribution state, Margot explained. With evidence of her affair and financial entanglement with Mr. Blackwell, we can make a strong case for a favorable settlement. I also started building a support network. I had lunch with my brother Alex, telling him everything. He was stunned but immediately supportive. Whatever you need, I'm here. He promised that I met with our closest friends, David and Sarah Thompson, who had known us since we moved to Portland. I didn't tell them about the affair yet. That would come later, but I subtly began reinforcing my role in our social circle independent of Eliza. Finally, I researched Richard Blackwell more thoroughly. His position at Northwest Development was secure, but his reputation was built on an image of family values and integrity. His wife Caroline sat on the boards of several prominent charities. They had 2 teenage children at an exclusive private school. The Blackwells were fixtures in Portland's society pages, often photographed at charity galas and cultural events. In other words, Richard had much more to lose socially than I initially realized. By the end of those 3 weeks, I had accumulated evidence, secured legal representation, stabilized my finances, and mapped out vulnerable points in both Eliza's and Richard's carefully constructed public images. The architect in me appreciated the irony. They thought they were building something together, but they had failed to account for the structural weaknesses in their design. Now I would systematically expose those flaws until the entire facade collapsed on a Friday evening. As Eliza prepared for what she claimed was a client dinner, I sat at my drafting table finalizing my own plans. While she applied her makeup upstairs, I was downstairs calculating the precise pressure points that would bring maximum impact. "Don't wait up," she called as she left, the door closing behind her with a decisive click. "I won't," I replied softly to the empty room. "But you should." I began dismantling their social lives with surgical precision. The goal wasn't just to expose the affair, but to ensure that the revelation would ripple through every aspect of their professional and personal worlds. Like an architect planning a controlled demolition, I identified the load-bearing structures of their deception and targeted them first. Phase 1 started at Sinclair Luxury Properties. I arranged coffee with Jennifer Hayes, the executive VP of operations and Eliza's direct supervisor. We had met at company functions over the years, and she had always been warm toward me. I chose a cafe in the Pearl District, an upscale area but far enough from Sinclair's offices to avoid unwanted encounters. "This is unexpected but nice," Jennifer said as we sat down at a quiet corner table. Her professional smile was genuine but curious. "How have you been, Daniel?" "Struggling, if I'm honest," I replied, allowing a carefully calculated amount of vulnerability to show. I presented myself not as angry, but as concerned and confused. "I've noticed some inconsistencies in Eliza's behavior lately, particularly regarding her work with Northwest Development." Jennifer's professional smile faltered slightly. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "She's been claiming to be at meetings that don't seem to exist in any official capacity," I explained. "There are expenses being filed for client events that I can't verify actually took place. And then there's this." I slid a folder across the table containing printouts of credit card statements showing charges at hotels and restaurants during business hours, all highlighted in yellow. Jennifer paged through the documents, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Her brow furrowed as she came across a receipt for a weekend stay at Cannon Beach. A trip Eliza had told me was a company retreat, but had been charged to our personal account. I'm not comfortable with the details I've been noticing, I continued, my voice low and concerned. At first, I thought it was just the stress of the job, but now I'm worried it might be something more serious. I wouldn't want her career or Sinclair's reputation to be damaged. I watched as Jennifer connected the dots, her eyes widening slightly. When she saw Richard Blackwell's name on several restaurant receipts, she was too professional to vocalize her suspicions, but I could see them forming. There's also been a pattern of her supposedly attending meetings with Northwest Development that aren't on any company calendar, I added. I called their office once when she said she was there, and they had no record of any meeting. Jennifer closed the folder and tapped her manicured nails on its surface. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Daniel. I'll look into it discreetly. May I keep these documents? Of course, I nodded. I just want what's best for everyone involved. As we parted ways, I knew Jennifer would begin investigating immediately. She had a fiduciary responsibility to Sinclair to ensure their executives weren't compromising client relationships. And Jennifer's reputation for thoroughness was well known in Portland's business community. She wouldn't just casually inquire. She would audit Eliza's expense reports, meeting logs, and client communications with meticulous attention to detail. The second phase targeted Richard's professional circle. I didn't approach his company directly. That would be too obvious and might trigger premature defensive measures. Instead, I reached out to Marcus Bennett, the editor of Portland Architecture Today, a prominent publication where I had occasionally contributed articles on sustainable design. That we met at his office, surrounded by architectural models and back issues of the magazine featuring Portland's most innovative buildings. Marcus had always respected my professional opinion, and I was about to leverage that respect. I've been considering writing a piece on ethical standards in development and marketing, I told him as we settled into his cluttered office. There are some concerning practices I've observed where client relationships become inappropriately close. Marcus leaned forward, journalist's instinct engaged. His salt and pepper beard couldn't hide the slight smile that indicated I had captured his interest. Are we talking about specific companies? I'd rather not name names at this stage, I said cautiously, playing the role of the reluctant whistleblower. But it involves high-profile luxury developments in the city, the kind that get featured in your magazine, like Northwest Development's Riverfront project. He asked, glancing at a mock-up of next month's cover that was pinned to his bulletin board. We're planning a cover story on that next month. I let my gaze linger on the mock-up, then looked back at Marcus with a pained expression. It would be a shame if prestigious publications lent credibility to projects that might be tainted by improper business relationships. The industry is built on trust and reputation. When those are compromised, I trailed off deliberately, letting Marcus fill in the blanks. I knew he prided himself on the magazine's journalistic integrity. Even the suggestion that they might inadvertently be promoting unethical practices would concern him. What exactly are you suggesting? He pressed, his interest now fully piqued. I'm suggesting that there might be more to the relationship between certain developers and marketing firms than meets the eye, I replied. Relationships that could compromise professional judgment, potentially violate industry ethical guidelines, or even breach contractual obligations. This sounds like something we should look into before going forward with the cover story, Marcus mused, already mentally shifting from promotional coverage to investigative journalism. I nodded solemnly. I'd hate to see your magazine's reputation affected if these issues come to light after you featured the project. Perhaps a broader piece on ethics in the industry might be more appropriate first? I'd be happy to contribute my thoughts as an architect who values integrity. By the time lunch ended, Marcus was reconsidering the cover story and planning an investigative piece on ethics in Portland's development industry. He had made notes about potential conflicts of interest and was already thinking about sources to contact. Again, I hadn't made direct accusations, but I had ensured that questions would be asked, questions that would lead inevitably to Richard Blackwell and his unusually close relationship with Sinclair's marketing director. The third phase was social, and perhaps the most delicate to orchestrate. Richard and Caroline Blackwell were hosting their annual charity gala for children's education the following weekend. It was one of Portland's premier social events, attended by the city's business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists. Eliza was supposedly attending as Sinclair's representative, though I knew her actual role would be quite different that I contacted Caroline Blackwell directly, something I had never done before. I had met her only twice at industry events, but she had struck me as intelligent, perceptive, and fiercely protective of her family's reputation. She was exactly the kind of woman who would act decisively once she suspected her husband's infidelity. Mrs. Blackwell, this is Daniel Mitchell, Eliza Mitchell's husband, I said when she answered her private number. I apologize for contacting you directly, but I needed to speak with you about a sensitive matter. Of course, Mr. Mitchell. What can I help you with? Her voice was polite but guarded, with the slight wariness of someone who receives many requests related to her charitable work. I understand you're hosting the Education Foundation Gala this weekend. Eliza mentioned she'd be attending in an official capacity for Sinclair. That's right. Your wife has been very supportive of our cause. There was genuine warmth in her voice when she mentioned the foundation. It was clearly a personal passion. I'm glad to hear that, I said carefully, modulating my tone to convey reluctance and concern. However, I wanted to make you aware that Eliza has been experiencing some professional boundary issues lately. There have been concerns raised at Sinclair about her relationship with certain clients. A pause followed, heavy with unspoken understanding. I'm not sure I understand, she said finally, her voice now cautious. I'm in an uncomfortable position, Mrs. Blackwell. As her husband, I want to support Eliza, but I'm also concerned about her behavior affecting your event. Perhaps it would be best if another Sinclair representative attended instead. I let the implications hang in the air, knowing that Caroline would be able to read between the lines. Another, longer pause followed. When she spoke again, her voice had a steely quality beneath the politeness. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Mitchell. I'll speak with Jennifer at Sinclair directly. Perfect. Now Caroline would contact Jennifer, who was already investigating Eliza's inconsistencies. The connections were beginning to form into a web that would soon entangle both Eliza and Richard. The final phase of social demolition was the most direct. I invited David and Sarah Thompson, our closest friends, to dinner at our home on an evening when I knew Eliza would be with Richard. David and I had been friends since college, and he and Sarah had been our most consistent social companions since moving to Portland. Their opinion carried weight in our social circle. I prepared Eliza's favorite meal, slow-roasted salmon with dill sauce, asparagus risotto, and a chocolate souffle for dessert. I set the dining room table with our best china and crystal, lit candles, and put fresh flowers in the center. When the Thompsons arrived, they were confused to find Eliza absent from her own dinner party. She had an unexpected work emergency. I explained as I served the appetizers, my expression a carefully crafted blend of disappointment and resignation. She sends her apologies. That's happening a lot lately, Sarah observed with friendly concern as she accepted a glass of wine. Is everything all right with her job? That's what I thought at first, I replied, allowing my worry to show. But, to be honest, I'm concerned about her. She's been so distant lately, always working late, always with this particular client. I pulled out my phone. In fact, let me try calling her again. I dialed her number, putting it on speaker. It went straight to voicemail, as I knew it would. Then I frowned, as if struck by a thought, and opened the location tracking app. That's odd. She said she was at the office, but her car has been parked in the West Hills for hours. I turned my phone screen to show them the blinking that represented Eliza's location. Isn't that Richard Blackwell's neighborhood? Sarah asked innocently. She worked in real estate as well and knew the area. You know, that developer with the glass house that was featured in Oregon Home last year. Is it? I replied, feigning surprise. How strange. She told me she was meeting with the marketing team at Sinclair headquarters downtown. David's expression darkened slightly. He had always been protective of me. Daniel, how long has this been going on? I'm not sure what this is, I said, my voice carefully calibrated to sound confused rather than accusatory. But she's been distant for months. Always on her phone, working late, weekend meetings that she can't seem to explain clearly. I shook my head. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. But my words were belied by the evidence on my phone screen, still showing Eliza's location at Richard Blackwell's house. The three of us stared at it in uncomfortable silence. Have you asked her directly? Sarah ventured finally, exchanging a worried glance with her husband. I've tried. She always has an explanation. A work crisis, a demanding client, an emergency. Meeting. I ran a hand through my hair in a gesture of helplessness. Maybe I'm overthinking things. Maybe, David agreed, but his tone suggested he believed otherwise. Or maybe you need to have a more serious conversation. By the time they left, David and Sarah were deeply concerned about Eliza. They didn't know the full truth yet, but they were now part of the narrative I was carefully constructing. And knowing Sarah, the information would spread through our social circle within days, not as malicious gossip, but as concerned friends checking in on a potentially troubled marriage. Within a week, the dominoes began to fall. Jennifer Hayes called Eliza into a closed-door meeting about account irregularities and client relationship protocols. Caroline Blackwell canceled Eliza's invitation to the gala and requested a different Sinclair representative. Portland. Architecture Today began making inquiries about the relationship between Northwest Development and Sinclair Luxury Properties, focusing particularly on who had authorized certain marketing expenditures. Meanwhile, our friends had started treating Eliza differently. Casual invitations dwindled. When we did attend social functions together, I noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Slightly cooler greetings, conversations that shifted when she approached, sympathetic glances directed at me when they thought I wasn't looking. The pressure was building, and neither Eliza nor Richard understood why their carefully maintained facade was suddenly developing cracks. They didn't realize that an architect knows exactly where to place stress to cause a controlled demolition. The night Jennifer Hayes placed Eliza on administrative leave, pending an investigation, she came home earlier than usual. Her face was pale, her normally confident posture diminished. She poured herself a generous glass of wine and sat at our kitchen island, staring into the middle distance. Rough day, I asked mildly, chopping vegetables for dinner as if nothing was amiss. Jennifer is auditing all my accounts and client relationships, she said, her voice hollow. Someone has been suggesting improprieties in how I manage the Northwest Development account. That sounds serious, I observed. Any idea who would do that? She shook her head, taking a large sip of wine. It doesn't make sense. It feels coordinated somehow. Caroline Blackwell canceled my invitation to the gala. That magazine is asking questions about our marketing contracts, and now Jennifer is reviewing all my client interactions. Strange timing. I agreed, continuing to chop carrots with methodical precision. Each slice of the knife was satisfying, a physical manifestation of how I was cutting through their deception. Richard is facing questions too, she added, almost to herself. The board at Northwest is suddenly concerned about transparency in client relationships. I responded noncommittally. Maybe someone noticed something that didn't seem right. She looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in months. I saw a flicker of suspicion cross her face, quickly, replaced by dismissal. I was just Daniel, her predictable, trusting husband. I couldn't possibly be behind the sudden scrutiny they were facing. That was their fundamental mistake, underestimating me. They saw my methodical nature as a lack of passion, my quiet demeanor as weakness. They never considered that the same mind that could design complex, interconnected buildings could also design their downfall. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as their social structure crumbled piece by piece. Eliza was excluded from key industry events. Richard was asked to step back from public-facing responsibilities at Northwest Development. Their furtive meetings became more difficult to arrange as both were under increased scrutiny from their employers. In one particularly satisfying development, Caroline Blackwell was seated at the head table at the charity gala while Richard was conspicuously absent, traveling for business, according to the official explanation. In reality, he was in a hotel downtown with Eliza, both of them desperately trying to figure out how their secret had begun to leak. What they didn't understand was that it hadn't leaked. It had been strategically exposed, one pressure point at a time. The social demolition was complete, and now it was time for the legal phase of my plan to begin. With the social demolition underway, I moved to the legal phase of my plan. The timing was crucial. Eliza needed to be socially vulnerable, but not yet aware that I knew everything. This would maximize my leverage in the divorce proceedings and minimize her ability to mount an effective defense. Margot Chun, my attorney, had prepared all the necessary documentation. Her reputation in Portland's legal community was formidable. She was known for her meticulous preparation and strategic approach to high-asset divorces. We had spent weeks reviewing financial records, cataloging evidence of the affair, and preparing a comprehensive legal strategy. The key is to act decisively, Margot advised during our final planning meeting in her downtown office. The Portland skyline stretched beyond her window, the Willamette River a silver ribbon in the distance. We file everything at once: divorce petition, motion for temporary orders regarding the house and accounts, and detailed financial disclosures that highlight any misuse of marital assets. And the evidence of the affair? I asked. We don't. Lead with it, she said, tapping her manicured nail on the thick folder of evidence we had compiled. But we make sure she knows we have it. The threat of public exposure in court documents often leads to more favorable settlements. Under Oregon law, dissipation of marital assets for the benefit of an affair partner constituted financial misconduct. That could impact asset division. The credit card statements showing hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and gifts, all potentially paid for with marital funds, would strengthen my position considerably. But on a Wednesday morning, Eliza was served divorce papers at her office, a calculated decision that ensured maximum professional embarrassment. The server, a discreet but efficient professional recommended by Margot, delivered the documents during a staff meeting, forcing Eliza to receive them in front of her colleagues. By that afternoon, she was calling me repeatedly, but I didn't answer. Instead, I had my brother Alex stay with me at the house to witness any confrontation that might occur. Alex had been my steadfast support throughout this ordeal, and his presence would ensure that any interaction with Eliza remained civil and witnessed. She arrived home early, bursting through the door with a mix of fury and panic on her face. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, hair falling loose from her usual sleek ponytail, makeup slightly smudged as if she'd been rubbing her eyes. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving the papers at me. Her voice echoed through our vaulted entryway that I was sitting calmly at the kitchen island, reviewing architectural plans for a new project. Alex stood nearby, a silent but reassuring presence. I looked up from my work, maintaining the composed demeanor that had always been my hallmark. "It looks like divorce papers," I replied evenly. "I know what they are. Why are you doing this? Why didn't you talk to me first?" Her voice cracked slightly, a rare display of genuine emotion breaking through her polished exterior. "The same reason you didn't talk to me before starting your affair with Richard Blackwell," I said simply. The color drained from her face. Her hand, still clutching the papers, began to tremble slightly. "What are you talking about? Please don't insult my intelligence any further, Eliza. I know everything. The hotels, the false meetings, the financial arrangements. I have recordings, photographs, and a complete timeline of your relationship." She sank into a chair, the papers falling from her hand to scatter across our imported Italian tile floor. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in our living room, a wedding gift from her parents. "How long have you known?" she finally whispered. "Long enough to ensure that this divorce will proceed exactly as I've planned it." Her eyes narrowed as realization dawned. "You've been setting me up," she whispered. "The questions. At work, Caroline canceling my invitation, the magazine inquiries. That was all you?" "I simply nudged things in the direction of truth," I replied, closing my portfolio of architectural drawings. "The consequences are the natural result of your actions. You had no right to interfere in my professional life," she snapped, anger temporarily overtaking her shock. "Do you have any idea what this could do to my career?" "About the same as what your actions were doing to our marriage," I countered. "You made choices, Eliza. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices." Alex shifted uncomfortably behind me, but maintained his silence. This was between Eliza and me. "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice hollow. The fight seemed to drain out of her as quickly as it had flared up. "What I want is clearly outlined in those papers. I'm keeping the house. I'm keeping my retirement accounts and investments. We'll divide the joint accounts, but any funds you used for your affair will be counted against your share. You'll take your personal belongings and your car. No alimony either way. That's robbery, she protested, some of her usual fire returning. I'm entitled to half of everything. This house, your retirement. I supported your career for years. You were, I corrected her. Before you used our joint funds to conduct an affair and attempted to conceal assets in preparation for leaving me. My attorney has documented everything, Eliza. Fight me on this, and not only will you lose in court, but I'll ensure that every detail becomes part of the public record. I picked up a USB drive from the counter and held it up. Every conversation you had in your car about leaving me once you had figured out how to protect yourself financially. Every hotel receipt. Every text message planning your rendezvous with Richard. All of it would become public record, available to the court, to Sinclair's management, to Caroline Blackwell's divorce attorney. She stared at the small device as if it were a loaded weapon, which, in a sense, it was. You wouldn't, she whispered. I would prefer not to, I acknowledged. But make no mistake, Eliza, I will if necessary. You and Richard plan to discard Caroline and me once it was financially convenient. You don't get to dictate terms now. She looked at me with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. I never thought you had this in you. You never really knew me, I replied, just like I never really knew you. Over the next 6 weeks, the legal process unfolded exactly as I had planned. Eliza initially hired an aggressive attorney who promised to fight for an equal division of assets. But her position weakened daily as more revelations emerged about her affair and financial indiscretions. Margot methodically presented evidence of how Eliza had used our joint funds to finance her relationship with Richard, hotel rooms charged, to our credit cards, expensive gifts purchased with our accounts, and even a weekend getaway to Napa Valley that she had claimed was a company retreat. The financial trail was damning. 3 weeks into the proceedings, Eliza's attorney requested a settlement conference. We met in a sterile conference room at Margot's firm, the Portland skyline visible through rain-streaked windows. Eliza sat across from me, her normally immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of strain, dark circles under her eyes poorly concealed by makeup, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail rather than her usual styled waves. Her attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit, spoke first. My client is willing to consider an expedited settlement to avoid prolonged litigation that would benefit neither party. Margot smiled thinly. We're prepared to proceed with litigation if necessary. As you've seen from our financial disclosures, we have substantial evidence of marital fund misappropriation. We dispute the characterization of those expenditures. Eliza's attorney countered, but there was little conviction in her voice. The credit card statements speak for themselves, Margot replied smoothly, sliding a folder across the table. As do the recordings, which we're prepared to submit to the court if needed. Eliza's face remained impassive, but I noticed her hands tightening around her water glass. Her attorney flipped through the folder, her expression growing increasingly concerned. The negotiations continued for 3 hours. By the end, we had reached an agreement that closely mirrored my initial demands. I would keep the house and my retirement accounts. Eliza would retain her personal investments and her car. We would split the remaining joint accounts, with adjustments for the funds she had spent on the affair. No alimony would be paid by either party. Most importantly, the settlement included a confidentiality clause preventing either of us from publicly discussing the details of our divorce or marriage, an addition that Eliza insisted upon to protect what remained of her professional reputation. As we prepared to sign the final paperwork, Eliza spoke directly to me for the first time during the meeting. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? I met her gaze evenly. I learned from the best. You and Richard spent a year planning how to leave your marriages with minimal financial impact. I just accelerated the timeline. Something like. Grudging respect flickered across her face before she looked down and signed the papers that ended our 12-year marriage. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwell was facing his own legal battle. Caroline had hired Martin Graves, the most feared divorce attorney in Portland, a man known for his ruthless approach to high-net-worth separations. With 2 teenage children and significantly more assets at stake, Richard's divorce was messier and more public than ours. Caroline had received an anonymous package, which I had carefully prepared and sent through an untraceable service, containing select evidence of Richard's affair with Eliza, including hotel receipts, photographs taken by my private investigator, and transcripts of particularly damning conversations about their plans to eventually leave their spouses. With Oregon being an equitable distribution state, Caroline was entitled to a significant portion of their marital assets. But Richard's use of company resources to facilitate the affair, including having his assistant make reservations in Northwest Development's corporate apartment for meetings with Eliza, provided Caroline with leverage to demand more than an equal split. That be why the time our divorce was finalized, Richard had been removed from his position as executive vice president at Northwest Development. The board, concerned about potential liability and damage to their reputation, had negotiated a severance package that was far less generous than his contract would have normally provided. Caroline was awarded their primary residence, a substantial portion of their investment portfolio, and generous child support. The architect in me appreciated the symmetry. Eliza and Richard had built their relationship on a foundation of deception, and now that foundation had crumbled, bringing down everything they had constructed. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood on the deck of my newly purchased cabin on the Oregon coast, watching waves crash against the rocky shoreline. The small A-frame structure sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, providing spectacular views in the solitude I had come to value. I had kept our Portland house, but found myself unable to live there comfortably after everything that had happened. Too many memories lingered in those carefully designed rooms. I rented it out for a substantial monthly income and used part of the proceeds from our financial settlement to purchase this coastal retreat, a place with no history, where I could begin to rebuild. Professionally, my position at Horizon Designs had strengthened. My work had always been exceptional, but now I approached it with a renewed focus and creativity born from personal adversity. The clean, modern lines of a new, sustainable office complex I was designing for downtown Portland had already garnered attention from architectural publications. "You've always been talented," my colleague James remarked during a site visit. "But there's something different about your work lately. It's more, I don't know, confident? Assertive." I smiled, looking up at the skeletal framework of steel. That would eventually become a testament to resilience and adaptation. Let's just say I've gained a new perspective on structural integrity. As for Eliza, her career trajectory had changed dramatically. She was no longer with Sinclair Luxury Properties. Whether she resigned or was terminated remained a subject of industry speculation. After a few months of professional limbo, she accepted a position with a smaller firm in Seattle, a significant step down from her previous role, but far enough from Portland to escape the worst of the gossip. Richard Blackwell had fared even worse. Following his removal from Northwest Development and his costly divorce, he struggled to find comparable employment in Portland's close-knit development community. The whispers about ethical lapses and personal indiscretions followed him to every interview. Eventually, he relocated to Phoenix, where he took a position with a mid-sized development firm, a humbling transition for a man who had once been a power player in Pacific Northwest real estate. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was that Richard and Eliza's relationship had disintegrated almost immediately after they were both free to pursue it openly. Without the excitement of secrecy and forbidden rendezvous, and burdened by mutual resentment over their professional and financial losses, they quickly discovered that they had little in common beyond the thrill of deception. They lasted less than a month after both divorces were final. David Thompson told me over drinks at our now regular Thursday night meetup. David and Sarah had remained steadfastly in my corner throughout the ordeal. Sarah heard from Mia at Sinclair that they had a massive fight in a restaurant in Vancouver. Apparently, he blamed her for Caroline finding out, and she accused him of throwing her under the bus with the Sinclair executives. I took a sip of my scotch, savoring the warm burn. Relationships built on lies rarely survive exposure to the truth. David studied me with concern. "You doing okay with all this? It's been a hell of a year." I considered the question carefully. The pain of betrayal had evolved into something more contemplative, a deeper understanding of human nature and my own capacity for strategic thinking under duress. "I'm better than okay," I replied honestly. "For the first time in years, maybe ever, I'm living authentically. No false foundation, no structural weaknesses hidden behind an attractive facade." My brother Alex had observed something similar during his recent visit to the Coast House. "You know what's weird? he said as we sat by the fire pit watching the sunset. You seem more at peace now than you ever did during your marriage. He was right. While I wouldn't have chosen this path, navigating through betrayal had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The methodical, detail-oriented mind that made me a good architect had proven equally effective at dismantling a web of deception. Caroline Blackwell and I had spoken only once since everything had unfolded. We encountered each other at a charity event supporting arts education. Neutral territory where we could acknowledge each other without discomfort. Mr. Mitchell, she greeted me with a slight inclination of her head, her posture regal in an elegant black dress. I'm surprised to see you here. I've always supported the arts, I replied. And please, call me Daniel. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. You know, I received an interesting package a while back. Anonymous, but quite comprehensive in its contents. I met her gaze steadily, but said nothing. It contained everything I needed to make informed decisions about my future, she continued. Whoever assembled it was remarkably thorough. I imagined such information would be valuable in uncertain times. I responded carefully, the ghost of. A smile touched her lips. Indeed, one might even call it architectural in its precision. She raised her champagne glass slightly. To new beginnings, Daniel. I raised my own glass in response. To solid foundations. Our interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but it confirmed what I had suspected. Caroline understood my role in exposing the affair and, in her own way, acknowledged the justice of it. 1 year after the divorce, I stood in my coastal cabin watching a winter storm rage against the shoreline. Lightning illuminated the turbulent sea in brief, electric moments of clarity, much like the painful revelations that had transformed my life. My phone chirped with a text message from Margot Chin. Final paperwork from the house sale came through. Funds transferred to your account. Congratulations. Richard and Caroline's Portland home, the scene of so many clandestine meetings between him and Eliza, had finally sold after months on the market, closing the last remaining financial chapter of their marriage. I set down my phone and turned back to my drafting table, where plans for a new project were taking shape. A community center in Portland's Pearl District focused on sustainability and resilience. The building would incorporate elements that could withstand seismic activity, adapting to pressure rather than resisting it until breaking. Like me, it would be designed to endure. In my personal life, too, I was carefully laying new foundations. I had recently begun seeing Kate, an environmental lawyer I met during a municipal planning meeting. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on honest communication and shared values rather than the superficial compatibility that had characterized my marriage to Eliza. I don't want any secrets between us, I told Kate during our third date, sharing an abbreviated version of my divorce without the more calculating details of my response. My marriage ended because of deception, and I never want to experience that again. Kate had considered this thoughtfully. Transparency matters to me too, she said finally. But so does forgiveness and the understanding that people are complex. We all make mistakes. It's not the mistakes that destroy relationships, I replied. It's the lies we tell to cover them up. She had reached across the table and taken my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Then let's promise to avoid those particular mistakes. As the storm continued to batter the coastline, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal had been painful, the response calculated, but the outcome had ultimately freed me from a relationship built on illusion. That I had designed and executed a blueprint for consequences that had not only protected my interests but had revealed the truth to me, to our social circle, and to Caroline Blackwell, who deserved to make informed choices about her own life. Was there a certain ruthlessness in how I had orchestrated Eliza and Richard's downfall? Perhaps, but there had been a calculated cruelty in their betrayal too, in their dismissive conversations about their unsuspecting spouses, in their plans to discard us when financially convenient, in the casual way they had violated the most fundamental trust in a marriage. In architecture, every design choice has consequences. Materials respond to stress in predictable ways. Structural supports either hold or fail based on the pressures applied. Human relationships, I had learned, operated on similar principles. Apply pressure to weak points, and the truth emerges. turned from the window and returned to my drafting table, the parallel ruler firm under my hand as I drew a straight line across the blueprint. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within my carefully constructed sanctuary, all was calm, ordered, and exactly as I had designed it to be. Sometimes, destruction is simply the first phase of rebuilding something stronger. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience. In the face of profound betrayal, sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.